in the spirit of the Union League, the Legacy Foundation uses this to inspire and educate League members, students, and the general public to be more engaged citizen leaders. We accomplish this through a series of exhibits of civics and constitutional education for high school students, through lecture programs, tours of that League House, and by sharing the history and the values of this great institution, and of course through programs like our public affairs programs. In this recent crisis, we've also expanded our mission to include the Union League Employee Emergency Fund. This fund has already given grants to hundreds of League employees who are no longer able to work. And I thank all of the generous donors and their contributions to make this possible. I also want to thank our donors to the annual fund, especially our Lincoln leaders and Founders Circle members for their generosity. It is your generosity that keeps all the programs that we do and all of the great history and publications going. My thanks. So a few housekeeping items for tonight's program. If you're watching us on Zoom, you will have the ability to ask a question. If you look down on the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A section, and you can just hit that icon and ask a question. Our moderator will get to as many of them as he can. If you're on YouTube, you will not be able to utilize the Q&A function.
He did that as soon as he signed on. Yes,
Honored to introduce you, a great Union League of Philadelphia and a great citizen.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was almost better to have like a 30-second.
Mr. Edward Trzanski. Ed.
John, thanks very much. It seems like a lifetime ago when this evening's guest came and addressed the kindergarten club, and at the time was kind enough not to just take time out of his schedule then, but also he agreed to address the League membership. Well, we thought it was going to be under different circumstances and we'd be able to give him some milk and cookies for his trouble. So it won't happen tonight, but he still decided to be with us. And it's a great pleasure to welcome the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Mr. Josh Shapiro, who had a long distinguished career, both as a legislator in the House of Representatives and as an executive, as a Montgomery County Commissioner. Mr. Attorney General, thanks so much for coming in to talk to us about COVID from the perspective of your office.
Well, Ed, thank you very much. It's good to be with you virtually. It's good to see your face. And I appreciate you bringing us together for this conversation tonight. And I hope that's what it is. So I want to just spend, 5 minutes or so at the top trying to give a very broad overview of some of the work that's been going on, some of the challenges I think we face as a Commonwealth. And then I'm sure you'll ask good questions and we'll get a lot deeper into this. And let me thank John for his work, not just tonight, but making the Union League really an important resource for people during this crisis, not just a social resource, but a resource that's doing a lot of good for people who are in need. And so I want to thank the League for all they're doing. Look, we are battling today in Pennsylvania twin crises. We have a public health crisis as a result, obviously, of COVID-19, but we're also facing a very serious economic crisis. We have lost 30%, 29.5% to be exact, of our workforce since February of 2020. Think about that for a second. 3 out of 10 people have lost their job, and so many more have seen their paychecks, cut in half or cut by a sizable portion. We recognize that recovery, not just from this public health crisis, but the economic crisis as well, is going to take a monumental effort. And I firmly believe that while government is going to have an important role to play in this, it's got to be a collaborative effort between the public and the private sector if we're really going to be able to rebuild our economy, if we're really going to be able to deal with the public health side of this during this transition, phase before we have a vaccine. And so we've all got to come together, and that's the spirit within which I come to you tonight. Look, for my part as the Attorney General, I don't know that I've ever worked this hard. And my team has just been incredibly diligent in meeting the needs of the people of Pennsylvania. All the work we have been doing before to battle the heroin and opioid epidemic, protect children, all that work continues. But we've also taken on just a much bigger role in terms of protecting consumers. Since the COVID-19 crisis happened, we've received 4,791 tips about price gouging across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have followed up on every single one of them. We've seen an uptick in scams, specifically as it relates to the PPP funding and the federal stimulus checks and unemployment compensation and so-called miracle cures for COVID-19. And we're dealing with each and every one of them. In fact, I created a unique partnership with our United States Attorney in the Eastern District and the Western District to be able to work together, federal law enforcement and state law enforcement, to battle these scams. Those are just two of the examples of the work we're doing at the governmental level. But as I said at the top, you've got to work with the private sector to be able to deal with these challenges. And I want to give you one example of that, Ed. And that is, with all of the people out of work and struggling right now with a paycheck that has been cut in half, we recognize that banks have to play an important role in helping their customers and my constituents deal with these challenges. So about a month ago, I challenged the banks in Pennsylvania. I said, look, let's create what I'm calling is a Pennsylvania care package, where for 90 days, we're going to forgive people's mortgage payments and car loans and other consumer loans, where for 90 days, they don't have to worry about those annoying bank fees that people have to pay. And they don't have to worry about their credit getting dinged because they missed a payment. These are for people who are struggling, obviously. And I went to the CEO of Pennsylvania's largest bank, PNC, and I said, look, join me in this effort. It's the right thing to do, and it's a great example of a public-private partnership. The good news is PNC agreed, and as a result of that, now we have nearly 20 banks participating in Pennsylvania to help people get back up on their feet during this challenging time. For a list of all of those banks participating, you can find it on my website at attorneygeneral.gov/COVID-19. While you're there, we also were able to put together a rights and resources guide for individuals and businesses to help them understand what rights they have under state law and what resources are available to them. I won't get into all the details, but it answers questions like, can my power be turned off? Can I lose my broadband? Can I be evicted from my home? And by the way, the answer to all those questions is no. And we provide all of those resources there. That's a service that we're trying to provide to our constituents across Pennsylvania. We're also working with individual businesses to make sure that they're looking after their workers and creating unique public-private partnerships. We partnered with DoorDash, which is helping the restaurants survive through this really challenging time. DoorDash, as a result of me being involved, has now put greater protections in place for their workers, greater assistance for them and their families, and other gig companies are going to be following suit soon. So I summarize that as just a few of the things we've been working on. I guess, in closing, I would say this: as we approach Memorial Day here, Ed, and to everyone watching, I recognize this will not be the typical Memorial Day with big groups hanging out at the beach or doing barbecues or whatever it is that we'll do. But I hope that in some ways it actually gets us back to the true meaning of Memorial Day, where we remember those heroes who came before us. We remember some of the people that are along the walls, Ed, not just behind your head there, but in the walls of the Union League, who showed us that in times of great challenges, they rose to the occasion and they stepped up and they met the challenge with great strength and great fortitude. I have seen great strength and fortitude from the people of Pennsylvania. This is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be over tomorrow. It's going to take some time. But I want you to know that I continue to summon courage from those who have demonstrated that kind of heroism before us. And I hope that on this Memorial Day, you are able to find some happiness, and you are able to find some time with your families and loved ones in limited circles. But I also hope you're able to get back to the true meaning of this holiday. And I know that our country will overcome this. Our Commonwealth will overcome this. And I'm incredibly proud of the people of Pennsylvania who have done their part to flatten this curve and put us in a position where we can now come through this. Ed, thanks, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Well, Josh, thank you. And I should mention parenthetically that Josh and I haven't talked this program over in advance. So I had a setup in mind, and just to show that great minds think alike, at least in one case, I was able to find a frame of reference that can capture a lot of the questions that we've gotten up until this point, and there are quite a few that are populating my screen right now. So let me start with this, Josh. I don't know if you were able to see it, but on the 14th of this month, Peggy Noonan wrote a brilliant piece in the Wall Street Journal. It was an opinion piece entitled "Scenes from the Class Struggle in Lockdown. Those who are anxious to open up the economy have led harder lives than those holding out for safety." And her thesis is something you've touched on, that there are people who are not getting a paycheck, who are living much closer to the consequences of what's happening, and they're pushing back because they really have no choice. And they also look at the expert class, the Dr. Fauci's of the world, who initially said, look, this isn't going to be that bad. And really don't wear a mask in public. It's counterproductive. And then they went 180 degrees opposite of their initial advice. Now, it's understandable because, as you've said, and as Noonan points out, this COVID is a moving target. It's going to be with us for a while. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to wash hands, maintain social distance, wear masks, and just be intelligent in how we approach trying to find that sweet spot, threading the needle the way you described it, government and the private sector, finding out what works for the largest number of people. So with that as a foundation, let's get to a couple questions. We have one asking, what are your perceptions about the challenges in crafting policies for a state that is as demographically and geographically diverse as Pennsylvania?
Well, no doubt it is a challenge. And obviously we're dealing with so many different types of regions, right? You know, densely urban populated areas like where the Union League is, to very remote rural communities. I visited, I think, all of them, certainly every county in Pennsylvania where, you know, it's pretty easy to practice physical distancing. They do that every day, right? And you also have examples where you have great access to healthcare to help someone who gets ill. In other communities where great healthcare doesn't exist, especially in our rural communities. You have communities that are impacted by this crisis because, even worse, because they live in poverty. They have underlying health conditions, largely as a result of not having access to healthcare, and they don't have the ability and the means and the technologies that Ed, you and I and the viewers here tonight may have to keep themselves safe. And so you're dealing with lots of different kinds of people and lots of different types of terrain. One of the things that you saw in Pennsylvania, unlike other states, and to be clear, I don't make the decisions about opening or closing or what have you. Happy to comment on it as we go through, but I just want to be clear in terms of what my role is. But the governor opened and closed things, or closed and opened things, county by county. And while not every county is exactly the same, they tend to have a lot more in common than maybe the Commonwealth writ large. And so I think taking this on a county by county approach is the best possible way to do it, by learning from local government officials who have a good sense of what's happening on the ground and can relay that information to the state. Those are things that we need to continue to do as we go forward. And as we reopen, no doubt there will be a flare up somewhere. There will be a situation where we need to, you know, maybe tighten things up in one particular area or loosen it up in another. And I think the more we can maintain that flexibility, and look at the counties more individually as opposed to more broadly as a Commonwealth, the better off we'll all be.
Josh, a number of people, and by the way, to go back to this Peggy Noonan piece for a moment, she says one of the unfortunate outcomes of the present circumstance is that there's a class struggle that has created some rather large cleavages between the protected and the unprotected. And she's speaking specifically about government. And unfortunately, she quotes Governor Wolf, who said those who were against his protocols around shutdown and wanting to open up, he called them cowards. And the governor of Michigan, Whitmer, referred to her opponents as racists and misogynists. And Noonan points out, I think quite correctly, this just isn't helpful. So to try to get to a more helpful posture, there's a question asking, to what extent have you, the state legislature, and other elements within government been consulted by the governor's office in drawing up these protocols and trying to find that intelligent path between safety on the one hand and people earning a living on the other?
Sure. I didn't see Peggy's story, but I have the gist of it based on what you said. So I want to react to that. I want to react to it with a slight caveat, if you'll allow me here. As the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I represent the Commonwealth in litigation. And so some of what you're asking me to do is to comment on the actions of my client, as it were in this case. And so I'm simply not going to do that because it wouldn't be proper. That said, I am going to try and get at the heart of what you're asking. And I'm sure if I don't, Ed, you will ask me the question again, and we'll go from there. But look, I'll tell you what, you cited two governors, Whitmer and Wolf, two Democratic governors. How about I cite a Republican governor to you, someone that I served with as Attorney General, who is now the governor of Ohio, and that is Mike Dewine. And I was struck by something Dewine said just the other day. He talked, when it came to that frame about reopening versus, public health and that debate that we're having in this Commonwealth and in this country. He spoke about making people feel confident again. And look, with about 70% of our GDP, being tied up in consumer spending, I think that's actually the right question to be asking. How do we strike a balance here where people feel confident again to show up at the store, to come back to one of the tall buildings that's an office, park right near the Union League? And how do we give people in government the tools to be able to make wise decisions for themselves and their customers and clients? And how do we make people feel confident that they can resume some normal practices, be it retail or showing up for work or sending their kids to school or camp or whatever the case may be? And I think fundamentally what we're seeing in too many states are the constituencies that matter most. And you cited a few of them, the chief executives and the legislators. I would also add the business sector, the chambers of commerce, et cetera, to that. They're all talking past one another. And this discussion has become hypercharged and politicized. For those who disagree with me or my party affiliation, you're probably pointing the finger at me and my party. And for those who agree, you're probably pointing the finger at the other. I would just encourage you, for the purposes of our conversation here, to not point fingers at one party or the other. Neither one has all the answers, but rather what we should do is figure out the fundamental question. How do we make people feel confident again that they can go about resuming their activities before we have a vaccine? Obviously, once we have a vaccine, it's a different game. My view is you need to have a whole lot more testing. We are flying blind from a data perspective on so much of this. Have a lot more testing. Empower business owners, leaders, et cetera, to say, as government officials, as public health experts, I'm not pointing to myself on that, I'm just saying government in general, Here are the 5, 10, 20, 50 things you can do for your business, for your school, for your camp, for your rec center to keep people safe. And we want to encourage you to take those steps or something equivalent to those steps based on the unique needs of your business in order to keep people safe. And we are going to trust that you're going to exercise very good judgment to do that. I think as we move into this, I think the governor calls it the yellow phase of the reopening. Those kinds of conversations have to be happening in order to get people on the same page and work through these issues. Clearly, no business has ever had to deal with this. No governor has had to deal with this, at least since 1918, 100 years. And so this is uncharted waters. And I think the more we tone down the rhetoric and stop talking past one another and figure out how to talk to one another while focusing on that issue of confidence, then I think we can be better off.
So Josh, you are the prosecutor, if you will, for the governor and for the Commonwealth. The shutdown orders that he's given and the threats that if people do not comply, he'll pull licenses, withhold federal funding and the like. Is there a difference between statutory law and what he is putting out as an edict at this point when it comes to law enforcement? Do you see any difference between statutory law and what he's telling people to do?
Okay, well, let's begin with the enforcement of the governor's orders against, business X or place Y or whatever the case may be. That is done by local police, or if you don't have local police in your community, that's done by the state police. That's not done by my office. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the challenges to the governor's authority in this area have come, and they've come fast and furious here. And that's where, I referenced before, I serve as counsel to the governor, not Josh Shapiro to Tom Wolf, but Attorney General to governor, as has been the case for a long time in this Commonwealth. And we have been to court all the way up to the state Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court. And each and every time the court has been persuaded that the governor has this authority to act in the manner that he has. So he is relying on the statutory authority he has. He's relying on the interpretation of the highest courts at the state and federal level. The federal question's a little bit still unanswered, though. When seeking an injunction, the other party was unsuccessful at getting that. And and that's where the law stands right now. And the governor, again, I'm not the governor. I'm not here to speak on his behalf, but he does have that legal authority.
So Josh, there are two rather closely related questions. And the first is, so what do you say to the small business owner who really has no choice but to reopen? And they may want to do it under the most cautious of circumstances, but they face certain doom and many bad outcomes if they don't reopen, especially when that small business is engaged in the very things that the big box stores are part of. They get to stay open, but the small business that has some piece that box store has, they're told you can't open.
Look, I understand those concerns, and I understand the challenges that businesses face. And I mean, I spend a good part of my day just calling businesses, and not just business leaders of huge corporations, but small businesses as well, and just trying to understand the challenges that they face and make sure they're aware of what resources exist. Some at the federal level, like the PPP loans, which many people have taken advantage of. Some at the state level, where exemptions can be sought and gained based on, the specific, products that they're making or manner in which they're doing their work. And I'm trying to do everything in my power, within the power that I have, which is limited in this area, candidly, to work with them to help them through this. I think the more that they can, in a civil, thoughtful way, explain the challenges for their industry and work with the governor, the more you can see some loosening of those restrictions, but still also complying with the health needs of a community. An example of that, Ed, the real estate industry made very clear that they thought that they could do, showings and viewings and things like that in a way that was careful, that wouldn't put other people at risk, and that they were going to limit the number of people who go in and clean and do all the things that would need to be done. And they worked with the governor, and they came up yesterday with some new guidelines that aren't the way it was prior to COVID, but they're loosened up in a way that homes can be sold and bought again. I think having a constructive dialogue is the best way to do that.
Josh, PPE. People don't have medical degrees, but they know that PPE is personal protective equipment and that we simply do not have enough. China has behaved horribly, first in hiding the fact that this came from them and then not sharing information, and then not honoring contracts to deliver PPE, or when they did, sending defective materials. Has your office been involved in any kind of investigation? Do you see yourself going into any prosecutions over the lack of PPE and any bad players who may be holding it back from customers in Pennsylvania?
We have, but I really can't comment on it beyond that. Here's what I do want to say, though, Ed. This crisis has laid bare our lack of infrastructure in this country, our lack of manufacturing capability, which has been eroded through Republican and Democratic administrations over the last number of decades. And one of the clear things that we damn well better learn from this is that we've got to rebuild our manufacturing capabilities in this country, and that we have got to make sure that we have the necessary equipment to deal not just with military battles overseas or those like 9/11 that land on our shores, but on pandemics like this, on challenges as a result of environmental changes, and all the kinds of things that we know are going to come. It is insane, not even insane, that's the wrong word. It is angering to me that we can't do enough tests in this country because we don't have enough cotton swabs, that we're struggling trying to figure out how we're going to get enough vaccine when we finally do have one out, because we don't have enough glass vials. That is a fundamental failure in this country. And it is a failure for both parties and governments at the state and federal level for not investing more in our manufacturing sector, and for believing that we can ship it overseas to China and order it on Amazon. I use Amazon, you use Amazon. It's okay to get that stuff that way, but we have got to rebuild our capabilities in this country. And this is one lesson that I hope we learn, and learn pretty damn quick, from this COVID-19 crisis.
Josh, let's go back to an earlier.
Sorry to get animated, but I get.
No, that's right. No, listen, I think if everybody had one of the clickers at home and you ask the question, do you agree? You're going to get 100% on that. And it is gobsmacking, as the British would say, that we would put ourselves in this situation. I want to go back to an earlier question I asked. Sure. Where someone very specifically said, so is there any coordination between your office and different emergency response people, along with the governor's office and his health people, to try to come up with the protocols for right now? But also, since you've brought this up, strikes me that you might be in a position to drive this issue of coming up with a medical defense posture for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, so that we take all the steps we have to, and it's going to be a long uphill slog to get to the point of ensuring that we're not going to run out for the next pandemic.
Yeah, I am engaged in lots and lots of conversations with the governor, with his administration, with lawmakers of both parties, with leaders in the private sector. And there's a lot of discussion about how we go about doing this and how we go about making the serious commitment as a Commonwealth and as a country that we saw after 9/11, that we need to react in a similar way in this situation to global pandemics and other challenges going forward. So yes, we are having many of those conversations. Obviously, the governor and his Department of Health, they're in charge, but we are having a lot of discussions about a whole bunch of these things on a daily basis.
Nursing homes. Your office announced on the 12th of May that you were going to have an investigation of nursing homes without betraying anything that is sensitive in terms of the investigation. Tell us what you're looking into and why.
Well, and just to clarify, I mean, we had already been investigating. We merely confirmed that we have several ongoing criminal investigations into nursing homes across Pennsylvania. Beyond that, I really am not in any position to comment further. I would say, for clarification purposes, the Department of Health is the lead regulatory agency. So if you have concern about a loved one who is in a nursing home, or you have a concern, that they're not getting adequate attention or something, or you have concern about someone working there who doesn't have adequate PPE, for example, those are regulatory issues that need to go straight to the Department of Health. We are looking at criminal neglect and examining complaints about that, and again, we're in an early investigative stage, but examples of that across Pennsylvania. We will not tolerate anyone taking advantage criminally of a senior or older Pennsylvanian or someone in the care of someone else in an institutional setting, not during COVID-19 or before or after.
Josh, one of the great areas of concern is protection for employers as we start to open again, and the question of liability protection. And by way of example, the governor has said he'd be willing to extend protection
for some hospital workers and
for doctors and nurses, but not for the institutions.
Right.
And we both know that in the event of a lawsuit, you go after the deep pocket. So you'll be coming after those institutions who actually put those doctors and nurses to work. And I don't care if it's healthcare, it's anything. Where do we find the balance to give employers the protection they need so that they can feel safe to hire workers, and on the other side, workers feeling safe to go back?
Look, and again, I think we talked before about confidence, and I think that is one part of the discussion. That is clearly a discussion that Mitch McConnell wants to have in the United States Senate. I think it's a discussion that is going to continue to evolve in Pennsylvania between legislative leaders and the governor. The governor has vast authority during the time of the declared crisis to issue immunity from liability, as I think was the example that you were using at the top, for some doctors and healthcare workers in an institutional setting, in a hospital setting. And so, we'll have to see how this conversation plays out over the course of the next, several months and years. I think we have to strike a balance, obviously, with making sure people are held to account when they do something wrong, when they harm a loved one, or when they do something that is reckless or puts a client or a customer at risk. And working to strike that balance is important. And again, these are conversations that are happening more in legislative chambers than within my office.
Josh, someone has written in that they're involved in construction. They're working on critical projects, but there is an arbitrary limit, and this is the questioner's term, arbitrary,
Okay.
of no more than 30 individuals on the work site. Any idea how the limit was set? And also, as importantly, and there are a couple people asking the question. Are you going to be prosecuting people for violating the governor's orders in this case and in others, where people start to resume economic activity faster than the orders allow?
Well, look, I mean, I've answered the second part of that already, which is enforcement comes under the responsibility of your local law enforcement. So I'm not sure where this construction is, but let's just say it's Philadelphia, that'd be Philadelphia PD. Or if you're in a community without local police, it would be the Pennsylvania State Police. And of course, Pennsylvania State Police has jurisdiction across the whole Commonwealth, so they could step in anywhere they'd like. Those cases, if they are brought, would go to the local district attorney's office. It's really not my role as the attorney general. The setting of the limits, I think, was the first part of your question. You know, how many people could be in a construction site at a time? Look, every governor, every mayor right now is trying to do their best. And you know, what I hope is that as they try to strike that balance, they rely on data, they rely on science, they rely on medical experts to say that, you know, this is roughly a limit that's going to allow us to, you know, reopen the economy, but still keep people safe. And it's an imprecise decision, whether it's 30 or 31 or 35 or 25. And I'm sure that the questioner doesn't like 30 and wants something much higher. I get that. I understand that. And I'm not trying to in any way be argumentative with the questioner. I'm just saying that, you know, you've got to make these recommendations for these policies that the governor sets, I don't set, based on science, based on data, based on the word of health experts. And, you know, we're all trying to work through this as best as we can.
Josh, we all love the media sometimes. And there are many who've talked about panic porn that the media has engaged in a relentless campaign of scaring the hell out of people.
I've never heard that term before, Ed. Okay.
You have now. And
now I have. Never thought you would have said that, but okay, go ahead.
Well, I never thought I'd look like this. So once a century. Look, has the media been helpful in informing the public and in building bridges of cooperation between the private sector and government?
You know, it's interesting. I do every day at 3 o'clock. I have what I call the general's briefing. I do it on Instagram, and I try to invite different people on to have a conversation about what's happening in their community or in their elected office or their position or whatever. And one of the guests I had on, I guess probably now a couple of weeks ago, was Jim Gardner from 6 ABC. Everybody knows Jim, of course. And you know, I'm paraphrasing now, but one thing I said to him was how much I think people really value local news right now, to keep them informed and to help them understand what's happening in their community. What are the new rules of the day? What are the loosening of restrictions? What are the tightening of restrictions? And I think the public tends to trust people like Jim and others in the local news to be able to deliver it, you know, in an unbiased, you know, straight up fact-based way. And, you know, I think, you know, Jim commented, again, paraphrasing, that I think he and many of his colleagues really feel like this is some of the most important work and the most important time that they've ever done. So I think the local news has become a very important part of disseminating the word and getting the information out there. I think cable news is a little bit different, right? And there's a lot of screaming going on, and they're screaming on the left and screaming on the right. And I don't know that that's particularly helpful. And I don't tune into a lot of that. And I don't sort of buy into the kind of infotainment. I realize some people may enjoy that. I'm not here to tell you not to watch it, but I don't know that that is the most helpful thing for a jittery public right now. The public needs to be reassured. They need leaders who are going to speak honestly and candidly to them and reassure them. They need them to not feed them a bunch of nonsense, and they need them to be, you know, compassionate and express some sympathy for the nearly 100,000 Americans who have died. I mean, we need to have a moment of mourning as well in this country. And, you know, I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, or, you know, what news channel you're on. I think that that is really important right now, that people with platforms speak honestly and forthright and compassionately and understand the twin challenges that we face, on both the public health side and the economic side.
Back to that Noonan piece, in her conclusion, she basically says,
I'm going to have to Google that when we're done.
you really do, because it's
Yeah.
extraordinary, because I think it's the sensible middle that we're always hoping for in government. And she really does talk about the need to speak with some compassion for the
Yeah.
plight of,
Yeah.
and I'll extend it. It's not just the plight of the family who suffered a loss, either a loved one who's died of COVID or devastating economic loss, but also to have some understanding for the elected and appointed officials. They have a pretty tough job to do. So that's very much in her piece. I want to go back to the question of retailers raising prices on critically needed items. And I've seen it myself. I look at Amazon and eBay to try to get things that aren't otherwise available. And many times I just look and I say, how could it be that they're selling this item for this price?
Right.
Do you find a difference between the online retailers and the brick front people who are selling things?
So as I said before, we've received just under 4,800 price gouging tips. And look, not all of them are price gouging, but of those that are price gouging, we've seen a lot online and a lot in the community. And within the community, we've seen them at big box retailers, and we've seen them at local, mom and pop corner stores. So we're seeing it all across the board. I organized a coalition of attorneys general, to Democrats and Republicans, to work with the major online marketplaces, Walmart, Amazon, Craigslist, Facebook, just to name a few of them, to say that rather than wait for us in the States or some consumer to say, hey, that product shouldn't cost that much, kind of what you're describing there, Ed, to use the vast technology they have to spot price spikes on their marketplaces right when they happen and shut it down before a consumer is harmed. And the good news is they answered our call. And you've seen a lot of change on Amazon in particular over the last month as a result of the attorneys general, led by my office, intervening and pushing for that change. And so, we're going to continue to police this wherever we find it. I will also say that I've been working with business leaders, particularly in the grocery sector, to understand the supply chain issues that they have, so that we're not looking at something as price gouging when instead it's an issue at a farm somewhere else that's impacting grocers all across the region. And we want to be very sensitive to responsible retailers and manufacturers and distributors and wholesalers, I should say, during this time. Now, when they don't have an excuse for it and they're meeting the definition of price gouging, which is 20% higher than what the average price was the week prior to the COVID-19 crisis declaration by the governor, then we're going to hold them accountable, because I'm sure as heck not going to let them take advantage of consumers during this time.
So Josh, you just used the word regional. And there's a question about the extent to which you are working with other attorneys general in the region. Is there any coordination between yourselves in terms of not just this price gouging issue, but writ large on all matters having to do with COVID?
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just in the region, it's across the country. I'm on the phone individually with other attorneys general on a daily basis. And multiple times a week, we gather through an organization called NAG, the National Association of Attorneys General. NAG is not the nicest.
You want to come up with a new acronym?
Yeah. And we're on the phone with the White House, with each other, multiple times a week. So we're talking all the time.
What's front of mind for you every day when you're coming into the office?
making sure that my team has all the resources they need to work remotely, that my agents who are out in the field, particularly those who are undercover, are protected with the necessary equipment they need to keep themselves healthy as they go out and do a job for the good people of Pennsylvania. Trying to work, trying to do these workarounds with certain aspects of courts closed, but still wanting to maintain peace and security in our communities, to lock up those people that need to be locked up, and those who don't, being careful and cautious about that. Recognizing that we still have a massive heroin crisis, fentanyl, and opioid crisis. We're still locking up gun traffickers in Philadelphia during this time. We've not taken a break from that. And so it really is making sure my team is settled and has what they need, that we're able to continue to do all the work we were doing prior to COVID-19, doing some of these things that have sprung out from COVID-19 that you and I have talked about here today. And then I find myself spending a good chunk of my day. My days are so long right now, and I'm not complaining. This is what I signed up for, but I spend a good part of my day actually just connecting dots for people, where it's maybe not within the job description of an attorney general, but this business leader needs to talk to that person in order to put a deal together to manufacture masks, for example. And how do we do that? And I'm getting people together on a daily basis to answer those questions, to work with universities on how they're going to reopen, or camps or schools. And again, not so much from a formal legal guidance, but just more practically thinking through these big challenges. So spend a good bit of my day doing that kind of work. I would also just say, I'm giving you a rambling answer. I apologize.
No, that's right. It's a fulsome answer.
I worry a lot about lawlessness. The more people struggle, and it's a real struggle, we've talked about that here tonight, Ed, the more I worry about lawlessness, and I worry about people kind of taking things into their own hands. And the public are the heroes here, right? I mean, there is not enough law enforcement in this Commonwealth or in this country to force every single individual, all 350 million Americans or 13 million Pennsylvanians, to do the things we need them to do to stay healthy. And so you are relying on people's good angels to do the right thing and to step up and do their part to slow this virus. And I got to tell you, man, they are doing that. It is so inspiring to me to see people step up and do their part. But I recognize that for a lot of people, these are challenging times. And so I constantly am thinking about what happens if this group doesn't listen or that happens, and how do we have a law enforcement response that is as peaceful as possible, respecting the fact that people are really struggling right now, but also respecting the fact that we've got to keep things peaceful. Now, my agency is not the one on the front lines the way a municipal police department is, but certainly we're all working together in law enforcement to make sure we think through those issues.
A number of questions we've received, some of them are actually comments, and they all have to do with respect for the rule of law.
I hope some good ones.
Listen, the questions are better than the interlocutor is. So trust me, they're good questions. But a number of people have a concern over the rule of law, especially when it appears to be that some of the restrictions are somewhat arbitrary in terms of where you can go and where you can't go. So the idea that you can go into a crowded box store, but you couldn't walk a golf course until very recently, or you couldn't be at a playground.
Right.
And there's also a concern that rather than people exercising some gentle communal persuasion, people are ratting each other out, and it's creating tensions within the culture. So there's really not a question here. It's just you and I having this conversation,
Yeah.
and a couple of thousand of our best friends listening in. But I think we're in a tough spot. It's something, quite frankly, I don't think any of us really thought we would be in this situation And that's why I think having a conversation like this is so very helpful, because normally the politics that we have, and you've been in this arena, it's tribal, and it's very difficult to see things through the eyes of the other. So what's the takeaway message for people to try to have a little bit more grace and empathy for one another in seeing our way through what is going to be a long, difficult process with many more missteps to follow?
I think by and large, Pennsylvanians have demonstrated grace and empathy. I'm not sure that all their leaders have, and I'm not sure that that grace and empathy is portrayed on the cable news every night. It is a bit more tribal in those areas, to use your word, Ed. I think that right now we need to recognize that a lot of Pennsylvanians are really struggling, and that this has been hard on everyone. And it's been particularly hard on communities of color and areas that were already racked by poverty, and communities that are often forgotten by government in rural Pennsylvania. We need to make sure that we thank those Pennsylvanians, communicate with them directly about what's at stake here and what is still going to be asked of them as we go through this, and what our plan is to come out of it, and how we're going to do that. Leveling with people, trying to be less tribal, again, to use the word that you used. Having conversations like this that are civil, where I recognize that there are people watching who disagree with some of the things I said. Hopefully there's one or two that agree. But what we really need to do is communicate openly and honestly, and have these kinds of discussions. And I would also just say, this is a moment in time to depoliticize the conversation, and not, turn a pandemic into a hyper-partisan exercise. This is a moment, as George W. Bush did when he climbed up on the rubble after 9/11 to rally Americans, as Bill Clinton did when he stood in Oklahoma City to pull people together, as Barack Obama did at Mother Emanuel after the shooting in that church service. Our country is mourning right now, and we need leaders to climb up on that rubble and say, get on my back, we're going to get through this together. I'm trying to do that in my small part of the world. And I think every business leader, anyone who's at the Union League is a leader in their own right in some form or fashion. You have a constituency that listens to you or works with you or whatever the case may be. We're relying on you to help spread that message as well.
Well, Josh, we're going to do our part. And you've got a beautiful family. I was at your daughter's school. I know you're a man of faith, as am I, as are many Union League people. So we will continue to have faith in a loving God that'll help us through this, and that we will have faith in one another, that will extend to each other the proposition of candor, intellect, and goodwill. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
John Rico, I'm going to turn it over to you once more.
Ed, thank you. Josh, Attorney General Shapiro, thank you for being with us on this program. We appreciate your time. Ed, as always, a great job moderating the program. We're going to take next Wednesday off from COVID, and we're going to talk about another crisis, the Civil War. Next Wednesday is going to be a Civil War roundtable with our new time at 5:30. It's going to be Armies of Deliverance with Elizabeth Warren. It's a new history of the Civil War. It's an important new history. We hope you'll join us for that virtual program at 5:30, and then we'll be back to the COVID crisis at our next program on June 3rd. Again, Josh and Ed, thank you so much. We appreciate the program, and we will see everyone next Wednesday. Everyone, I hope, has a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Remember what Memorial Day is all about. Thanks again.
Stay safe.
you guys there?